You are standing in a city after sound has finished its work. The bombs have stopped falling, the engines have moved on, and the shouting that once filled the air has thinned into something distant and irregular. What remains is not silence, but a quieter order, one shaped by weight, dust, and the simple need to move forward through what is left behind. Before we begin moving what remains, take a moment to subscribe. Only if calm, human history told without urgency feels like a place you'll return to. And let us know where you're listening from, or which moment stays with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. Around you, buildings stand without interiors. Walls lean where rooms once were. Staircases climb and then end, opening directly into sky. Streets still follow their old paths, but they are narrowed now, clogged with brick and timber and glass ground fine enough to follow you home. Nothing here announces itself as temporary. The ruins do not feel like an interruption. They feel settled. Somewhere nearby, stone shifts, not collapsing, being handled, lifted, turned, set down again. This story does not begin with decisions made in distant rooms, or with the language of rebuilding that will come later. It begins here, at ground level, where days are shaped by what the body can carry and how often it must do so. If you find yourself drawn to these quieter histories, the ones that move slowly, that ask for patience rather than attention, you are already in the right place. Women move through the ruins, not as symbols, not yet as memory, simply as figures at work, learning the weight of what remains. This is where we begin. After the collapse. The war does not end all at once. It loosens its grip unevenly, releasing places before it releases people. Some sounds stop immediately: aircraft, artillery, the distant thunder that once structured the day. Other sounds linger: footsteps, coughing, the scrape of stone dragged across stone. You are standing in a city that still knows where everything used to be. Streets follow their old lines even when the buildings that define them are gone. Corners exist without walls. Courtyards remain, though no one remembers precisely which apartments once opened onto them. The city's shape survives longer than its surfaces. Rubble is everywhere, but it is not uniform. It gathers differently depending on how things fell. Some buildings collapsed inward, burying themselves. Others split open, exposing floors like stacked shelves. In places, the damage feels almost surgical. In others, it is absolute. What cannot be used becomes an obstacle. Doors do not open because debris presses against them from the inside. Windows look out onto nothing but broken masonry. Stairwells fill until they no longer function as passage, only as vertical containers. Movement becomes difficult in ways that do not show up on maps. This is why the work begins. Not with planning, and not with vision, but with clearance, with the need to make space where none exists, to allow the city to be crossed again, even if only narrowly, even if only on foot. Women arrive early. There is no single start time, no siren or whistle. The day begins when light makes it possible to see what you are lifting. In some places, groups are organized, assigned sections, quotas, overseers. In others, the work happens informally, shaped by proximity and habit. The women stand in lines where the streets are still recognizable. They face the same direction, not for ceremony, but for efficiency. Bricks are passed hand to hand. Those that can be salvaged are cleaned roughly, mortar chipped away with improvised tools. Those that cannot are set aside, forming new piles that will later need their own solutions. Everything is provisional. Hands learn quickly. The body adjusts its expectations. Weight becomes familiar. Pain becomes background. There is little conversation at first, partly because dust fills the air, partly because there is nothing yet to say that will change the task. The work repeats. Lift, turn, pass, step back. It is not dramatic labor. It is not fast. It does not look like rebuilding. It looks like sorting the remains of something already decided. All around, the city waits without comment. Some of the women wear clothing that once belonged to other contexts, coats meant for offices, dresses not designed for stone dust. Others have adapted what they can find. Gloves, if they exist, are treasured. Scarves protect mouths and hair more than they provide warmth. The absence of men is not discussed openly. It does not need to be. It is present in the way tasks redistribute themselves without debate, in the way no one asks who will do the heaviest work. Bodies take positions and keep them. By mid-morning, the air is thick with fine particles. Sunlight does not clear it, it only reveals it. Everything tastes of plaster and brick. The city smells of damp stone, smoke long extinguished, and something faintly metallic that no one names. This is not yet a story anyone intends to tell. It is a condition being managed, one brick at a time. As the hours pass, the work settles into its own logic. There is no rush, but there is no pause either. Stopping completely would mean starting again, and starting again is harder than continuing. The body learns this quickly. Muscles stay warm. Movements stay economical. Each woman adjusts her pace to the one beside her, not through instruction, but through attention. The lines hold. Someone stumbles on loose stone. The line bends, then straightens. A brick is dropped and splits. No one reacts. Loss is already built into the process. What matters is not perfection, but accumulation. By midday, the piles have shifted. What was once a wall is now a series of sorted materials. What was once impassable can be crossed, carefully, without climbing. These changes are small enough to be overlooked by anyone not present for the hours that produced them. You notice how the women rarely look up. Eyes stay level, fixed on hands, on ground, on the person directly in front of them. Looking outward offers no useful information. The scale is too large. The ruin does not respond to being surveyed. Instead, attention contracts. There is an efficiency to this narrowing of focus. It conserves energy. It prevents despair from interrupting motion. The city is not approached as a whole, but as a sequence of tasks that can be completed before nightfall. In some districts, Allied authorities appear intermittently. They carry clipboards, wear unfamiliar uniforms, speak in languages that do not yet belong to the streets. They observe, sometimes assign, occasionally intervene. Their presence is administrative rather than oppressive. They are there to make sure work happens, not to shape how it is felt. The women do not perform for them. No one straightens posture. No one increases pace. The work continues as it has, because the work answers to conditions more immediate than oversight. Food is scarce. Rations determine energy more than morale. A slightly larger portion can mean the difference between finishing a section and leaving it half cleared. Hunger does not inspire productivity. It limits it. The body negotiates constantly between what is required and what is available. And yet, the days repeat. There is comfort in repetition, even when it is physically punishing. The pattern creates predictability in a landscape that has lost all others. Morning light, gathering, work, diminishing strength, evening return. At home, if that word still applies, the body carries the day with it. Dust falls from clothing. Muscles continue to hold their shape even at rest. Sleep comes quickly, but not deeply. The city settles again overnight, shifting slightly as if responding to the day's handling. When morning returns, the work resumes not from where it ended, but from where it can be taken up again. Nothing about this feels like recovery. It feels like maintenance. The women do not speak of the future, not because they lack imagination, but because imagination does not clear rubble. What matters is that tomorrow can be entered with roughly the same effort as today. This is how collapse becomes inhabitable, not through meaning, not through vision, through sustained, unremarkable motion. The body learns the work. At first, the body resists, not in protest, but in confusion. The muscles involved are not the ones used before the war. Lifting rubble is not like lifting groceries or furniture. The weight is uneven. Bricks pull sideways. Stones shift in the hand. Nothing is balanced the way it is supposed to be. The body searches for familiar patterns and does not find them. Arms tire quickly. Backs stiffen after only a few hours. Knees ache from standing on unstable ground that never quite offers a level surface. Small injuries appear early. Split skin, bruised fingers, twisted wrists, and then become ordinary. You notice how quickly the women stop reacting to pain. Not because it disappears, but because responding to it would interrupt the sequence. Pain is acknowledged, adjusted around, and then folded into movement. The body recalibrates what it considers tolerable. Within weeks, posture changes. Shoulders round forward slightly. Hands thicken, skin hardening in places that never needed it before. Grip strength improves not through intention, but through necessity. The body learns where to place force so that it can be repeated hundreds of times without collapse. This learning is quiet. No one instructs it. There are no demonstrations, no training sessions. Each woman adapts privately, guided by fatigue and observation. You see someone adjust how she holds a brick. You copy it. Someone shifts her stance to protect her knees. You try the same. Technique spreads without language. The work demands a specific rhythm. Too fast and exhaustion arrives early. Too slow and the day stretches beyond what the body can endure. Over time, the women find a pace that keeps them functional. Not comfortable. Functional. The city imposes this lesson repeatedly. Dust becomes a constant companion. It coats the inside of the mouth. It settles in hair and eyes. Coughing is common, but brief. Lingering would slow the line. Breathing adjusts too. Shallow when lifting. Deeper in the pauses. The lungs learn to work around irritation, just as the hands work around sharp edges. This adaptation is not framed as resilience. It is framed as practicality. The body becomes a tool, but not an expendable one. It must last. There is no replacement waiting. Every movement is evaluated unconsciously. Can I do this again tomorrow? This question governs everything. As the weeks pass, the work stops feeling temporary. The body stops waiting for it to end. Instead, it integrates the labor into its understanding of normal. The weight of rubble becomes a known quantity. The absence of alternatives becomes settled. Eventually, the body stops asking whether this is sustainable. The question fades not because it has been answered, but because it no longer serves a purpose. The work is happening regardless. Energy is rationed instinctively. Movements are chosen not for speed, but for durability. The body becomes less expressive, more efficient. You can see it in the way the women stand when they are not lifting. Weight shifts to one leg. Arms hang close to the torso. There is a stillness that looks like rest, but is actually conservation. Even pauses are shaped by work now. The hands are the most visibly changed. Skin thickens unevenly. Fingertips lose sensitivity and then regain a different kind of awareness, one tuned to pressure and texture rather than softness. The hands learn to read materials quickly. Which brick will hold, which will crumble, which edge will cut. This knowledge is never formalized. It is carried entirely in the body. The body also learns limits. Not moral limits. Physical ones. How many hours can be endured before coordination slips? How much weight can be managed before grip weakens? When to stop, not because the work is finished, but because continuing would make tomorrow impossible. Stopping is not failure. It is maintenance. Some women begin to arrive already injured. Wrists wrapped in cloth. Fingers stiff from old breaks that never healed correctly. They adjust their roles within the line. Passing instead of lifting. Sorting instead of carrying. The line absorbs these changes without comment. This flexibility keeps the work going. There is no hierarchy, but there is awareness. Everyone knows who is nearing exhaustion. No one needs to announce it. The pace shifts subtly to accommodate it. Efficiency is collective, or it is nothing. As months pass, the work leaves marks that cannot be washed away. Spines curve. Knees stiffen. Certain movements become difficult outside the context of labor. Lifting a child, bending at home, turning quickly. The body now expects resistance where there is none. The work has rewritten its expectations. At night, the body does not fully release its tension. Sleep is shallow, interrupted. Muscles remain partially engaged, as if waiting for the next lift. The city settles in darkness, and the body mirrors it, never fully at rest, never fully alert. By the time winter returns, the women no longer speak of starting again. They speak of continuing. Cold sharpens everything. Stone bites through gloves. Metal numbs fingers within minutes. Breath fogs, then freezes on scarves. The body responds by tightening further, guarding heat, sacrificing comfort for endurance. Still, the lines form. Still, the hands move. What the body has learned cannot be unlearned easily. Even when the work ends for the day, the posture remains. Even when the rubble thins, the weight stays. The city is changing shape. So are the women who move through it. Work without recognition. At first, the work does not have a name. It exists as activity, not identity. Women are not yet described by what they are doing, only by the fact that they are doing it. The term will come later, once there is distance enough to need one. For now, there is simply the work, visible, continuous, and largely unremarked upon. It happens in public spaces, yet it is rarely watched. Passers-by move around the lines without stopping. Officials pass through, make notes, then leave. The work is present but not foreground. It does not demand attention. It occupies space quietly. This is not accidental. Labor that is necessary but unspectacular often disappears into the background. It becomes part of how the environment functions, like traffic or weather, not noticed unless it stops. You begin to understand how easily this kind of effort can go unrecorded. There are no ceremonies marking the clearing of a street. No plaques when a courtyard becomes passable again. Progress is measured informally, by how far one can walk without climbing, by how many doorways open again. Recognition is practical, not symbolic. Someone notices that a route to the water pump is easier. Someone else realizes that coal can now be delivered closer to home. These acknowledgements are immediate and fleeting. They do not accumulate into status. The women do not expect them to. There is no shared language for pride here. Pride implies choice, intention, an audience. This work is framed instead by obligation and continuity. It must be done whether or not it is seen. In some areas, men begin to return. They are thinner than remembered, quieter. Their presence alters the lines subtly, but not immediately. The work does not stop to reorganize itself. Tasks redistribute slowly, unevenly. Some men join the clearing. Others find different roles. No announcement is made. The women do not step aside all at once. They continue where they are, because stopping would create gaps the city cannot afford. Over time, roles shift, but the memory of who carried what first does not translate into authority or recognition. The work does not grant claims. As reconstruction efforts formalize, new language enters the streets. Planning, development, renewal. These words belong to offices and meetings. They describe processes that unfold above ground level, often away from the rubble itself. The women's labor does not translate easily into these terms. It has already happened by the time it is named. Photographers arrive eventually. They frame the women against ruins, emphasizing contrast, fragility and strength, destruction and effort. The images are compelling. They circulate. They begin to stand in for a much larger reality. But photographs freeze what was never static. They capture effort without duration. They suggest intention where there was routine. They imply recognition that did not exist at the time. You sense the gap forming between what is being remembered and what was lived. By the time the term Trümmerfrauen begins to circulate, much of the work it describes is already finished. The word arrives late, applied retroactively, as language often does when it tries to contain something that exceeded its notice. It gathers together years of labor into a single category, smoothing differences, compressing time. What it cannot capture is duration. The women do not suddenly recognize themselves in the name. It does not alter their days. It does not change how the body feels at the end of work, or how the hands stiffen overnight. For many, the label remains abstract, something used elsewhere by others. Recognition, when it comes, is indirect. A newspaper article, a photograph displayed briefly, a mention in speeches about recovery and renewal. These acknowledgments gesture toward the past without reopening it. They do not restore strength or reverse wear. By now, the city has changed enough that the rubble is no longer the dominant feature. Streets reopen. Transport resumes in limited form. New construction rises where ruins once stood, its clean lines erasing the irregularity of what came before. The work shifts away from clearance and toward building, a different kind of labor with different requirements. The women are less visible now. Some leave the work gradually, returning to domestic responsibilities or other employment as options reappear. Others remain longer, their bodies already adapted, their skills still relevant. There is no ceremony marking these departures. They simply stop arriving. In the official record, their presence fades quickly. The rebuilding of Germany becomes associated with plans, policies, and economic frameworks. The physical act of making space, of clearing what blocked movement, recedes into prehistory. And yet, its effects remain embedded everywhere. Every foundation laid depended on a cleared site. Every reopened street required someone to remove what once filled it. The city rests on layers of effort that were never formalized. You begin to see how easily foundational work becomes invisible once its function has been fulfilled. The women themselves carry the memory differently. In some bodies, the labor leaves lasting damage, chronic pain, reduced mobility, hands that never quite regain sensitivity. These changes are rarely connected publicly to the years of rubble work. They are treated instead as personal conditions, detached from cause. In others, the work lingers as habit. Movements remain economical. Strength appears where none is expected. Certain tasks feel easier than they should, others unexpectedly difficult. The body remembers what the narrative does not. When asked later about those years, many women respond briefly. They describe what they did, not what it meant. Meaning was not part of the job. It was not necessary for completion. The city stands. People move through it without thinking about what once blocked their path. Buildings rise where debris once lay. Life reorganizes itself around new routines. The work without recognition has succeeded, and because it has succeeded, it disappears. Clearing as necessity, not choice. There is a temptation, later on, to describe the work as voluntary. The word appears in summaries and retrospectives, used to suggest agency where, at the time, there was little room for it. Voluntary implies an alternative. It implies that one might have chosen otherwise. In the immediate aftermath of the war, alternatives are scarce. Food is rationed. Fuel is limited. Housing is damaged or non-existent. Movement through the city is constrained by debris. Survival depends on access, to water, to heat, to whatever employment can be found. Clearing rubble is not presented as a calling. It is presented as a condition. In some cities, authorities require women to participate as part of labor obligations tied to ration access. In others, incentives are offered, additional food, coal, or small wages. The specifics vary, but the underlying logic is consistent. Work is exchanged for viability. This arrangement is neither hidden nor dramatized. It is understood. You see women arrive not because they believe in rebuilding, but because they need what the work provides. They assess the cost, physical strain, time, exhaustion, and measure it against hunger and cold. The calculation is immediate and practical. Necessity clarifies priorities. Those who can avoid the work often do. Those who cannot, do not. This is not a moral distinction. It is an economic one. The lines form accordingly. Some women arrive with children in tow, too young to be left alone. The children wait at the edges, collecting fragments, inventing games among the ruins. Their presence does not soften the work. It underscores its inevitability. There is no rhetoric of empowerment here. Strength is not celebrated. It is required. The body is pressed into service not because it represents progress, but because it is available. Women constitute the largest remaining labor pool in the devastated cities. This fact, more than ideology, shapes the workforce. You sense how quickly narratives simplify this reality later on. The image of women choosing to rebuild fits comfortably into stories of recovery. The reality, women working because not working is not an option, fits less easily, and so it is often adjusted. Once necessity is established, it becomes invisible. The question of choice recedes from conversation because it does not alter outcomes. Whether compelled by policy or by hunger, the result is the same. Bodies arrive, work is done, the city changes. What varies is the degree of acknowledgement. In some accounts, the women are described as patriotic contributors. In others, as victims of circumstance. Both interpretations flatten the experience by imposing meaning from outside. From within the work, neither description applies. The women do not articulate their labor in terms of nation or injustice. They speak instead of hours, rations, injuries, and weather. The frame remains narrow because it must remain functional. Choice re-enters only gradually and unevenly. As conditions stabilize, some women are able to leave the work. They find other employment. They return to domestic roles. They move away. Each departure is quiet, unmarked. There is no ceremony to mark the transition from necessity to option. Others remain longer, not because they prefer the labor, but because alternatives remain limited for them. Age, injury, family responsibilities, and social position all shape who can step away and who cannot. The workforce thins without announcement. As it does, the narrative begins to shift. Clearing rubble is reframed as the first chapter of rebuilding. It is placed at the beginning of a story that moves forward confidently, toward growth and stability. In this framing, the women become symbolic pioneers, figures who ushered in a new era through sheer determination. This story is easier to tell than the one about constraint. It requires less explanation. It avoids uncomfortable questions about why certain bodies were available for this labor and others were not. It turns necessity into virtue and endurance into choice. You can feel the distance growing between memory and representation. The women who lived the work often do not recognize themselves in the later accounts. The emphasis is wrong, the tone unfamiliar, the focus misplaced. They remember exhaustion more than empowerment. They remember the feel of stone more than the idea of rebuilding. As the years pass, this gap widens. Public recognition increases even as personal recollection grows more muted. Anniversaries are marked. Exhibitions curated. The term Trümmerfrauen becomes fixed, carrying with it assumptions that were never part of the original experience. What is lost in this process is not accuracy, but texture, the sense of compulsion, the absence of choice, the way the work occupied the body without asking for interpretation. The city, meanwhile, continues to change. New buildings rise where debris once lay. Streets are paved. Movement becomes effortless again. The necessity that once governed daily life recedes from view, but it does not disappear entirely. It remains stored in bodies that remember what it meant to clear a path because there was no other way forward. The city changes shape. The city does not return to what it was. It reorganizes itself around what remains possible. As rubble is cleared, space opens unevenly. Some streets become passable months before others. Certain districts regain movement and activity while others remain static, sealed off by debris that no longer appears urgent once alternative routes exist. Reconstruction does not advance in a straight line. It follows priority. Transport corridors are opened first. Areas near administrative centers receive attention. Neighborhoods with fewer residents wait longer. The city's new shape reflects not memory, but utility. You begin to notice how absence hardens into permanence. Where buildings once stood, empty spaces remain. Courtyards expand into lots. Gaps appear in rows that once felt continuous. These voids are not temporary in the way people expect. They settle into the city's rhythm. The women adapt to these changes without comment. The work shifts from mass clearing to targeted effort. Instead of long lines passing bricks hand to hand, smaller groups tackle specific obstacles. The labor becomes less visible, more dispersed. It blends into other forms of maintenance. Some women are reassigned, others leave. The remaining workforce grows quieter. The body responds to the changing demands. Lifting gives way to sorting. Carrying gives way to precision. The strength built for repetition is redirected toward tasks that require steadiness rather than force. The body, already shaped by the work, adjusts again. This adaptability is not recognized as skill. It is treated as availability. As new construction begins, boundaries harden between types of labor. Professional builders arrive with tools and training. Their work is documented, planned, credited. The clearing that made their work possible recedes into the background. The women are rarely integrated into these new structures. Their labor belongs to an earlier phase, one that is now being folded into the past. You sense how quickly functional necessity gives way to institutional preference. The city wants to look forward. As reconstruction formalizes, the language surrounding the city changes. Where once there was talk of rubble and clearance, there is now talk of planning, zoning, and growth. These words imply order and direction. They suggest that the city is once again something that can be managed from above. The women's work does not translate easily into this vocabulary. It was situational, responsive, defined by what blocked movement rather than by what could be built. Once the obstacles are gone, the labor that removed them becomes difficult to locate within the new framework. You see this shift in the streets themselves. Surfaces smooth out. Edges are straightened. The irregularity that once demanded attention is erased. Walking becomes effortless again. The body no longer needs to calculate each step. For those who carried rubble, this ease arrives without celebration. It is noticed only in passing, a recognition that something once difficult is no longer so. The memory of effort lingers longer than the conditions that required it. In some neighborhoods, the transformation is abrupt. In others, it unfolds slowly, allowing traces of the old landscape to persist. A broken wall incorporated into a new structure. A foundation left visible beneath fresh construction. These remnants are rarely labeled. They exist as quiet witnesses, legible only to those who remember what came before. The women move through these changing spaces differently now. Their bodies still expect resistance. Hands still brace for weight that is no longer there. Movements remain cautious even when surfaces are stable. The city's new shape does not immediately overwrite what the body has learned. Over time, routines shift. New forms of work appear. Domestic labor resumes prominence. Wage labor expands. The women's presence in public clearing work diminishes until it becomes unusual rather than expected. No announcement marks this transition. It is felt instead as a thinning, fewer familiar faces in the streets, shorter lines, tasks completed by different hands. The city begins to forget the effort that preceded its reorganization. Not deliberately, efficiently. What remains is a structure that no longer shows the strain it once carried. The streets hold. The buildings stand. Movement flows again. The work that made this possible is complete precisely because it is no longer visible, and in that invisibility, it is absorbed into the city itself. Memory after use. Once the work is no longer required, it begins to change its shape in memory. Not all at once. Not deliberately. Memory does not erase. It reorganizes. It keeps what can be carried forward and lets the rest fall away, especially when the present no longer depends on it. For the women who cleared the rubble, this shift is subtle. There is no moment when they are told that what they did has ended. No formal conclusion. The work simply stops appearing on the day's list of necessities. Other demands take its place. Life fills the space. The body notices first. Muscles that were once essential begin to feel excessive. Strength no longer has a clear outlet. Certain movements, lifting, carrying, balancing, remain easy, while others feel strangely unfamiliar. The body holds on to its training even when the context has disappeared. This persistence is not celebrated. It is rarely even acknowledged. When the women speak of those years later, the descriptions are often brief. Factual. I worked clearing rubble. We went every day. It was hard. The language resists elaboration, not because the memory is weak, but because it does not lend itself to narrative. There is no arc to recount, no resolution to emphasize. The work did not lead anywhere. It allowed other things to happen. In public memory, however, the story begins to take shape. Exhibitions are curated, articles written. The women are framed as symbols of resilience, endurance, renewal. The images resurface, often the same ones, reused across decades. These representations are not false. They are incomplete. They compress time. They remove constraint. They replace necessity with intention. In doing so, they make the past easier to admire and harder to understand. You sense how this reframing distances the lived experience from its retelling. The women themselves rarely contest it. Correction would require energy, explanation, a willingness to reopen years that were endured rather than interpreted. Silence is often simpler, and so memory settles into its public form, streamlined, symbolic, safe. The work has been used. Now it is being remembered. As the years pass, memory continues to narrow. What remains is not the feel of stone in the hands, or the way dust thickened the air, or how the body learned to move so it could last another day. What remains are images, fixed, repeatable, easily shared. The women become figures in photographs more often than voices in records. Their labor is remembered visually rather than physically. Smiling faces amid ruins, sleeves rolled up, a posture of strength that suggests intention rather than endurance. These images circulate because they are legible. They fit into narratives of recovery without disturbing them. What they do not show is fatigue. They do not show the way repetition emptied time of distinction, or how the body continued working long after motivation ceased to matter. They do not show the cost carried forward, in joints that never recovered, in pain that arrived years later without explanation. This absence shapes how the work is understood. When later generations speak of the Trümmerfrauen, they speak of rebuilding as an act of will, of women stepping forward to restore a nation. The language elevates, but it also simplifies. It removes the condition that made the work unavoidable. For the women themselves, the years of clearing rarely become a central identity. They are one period among many, shaped by war, scarcity, and transition. The labor does not define them so much as it marks a boundary between before and after. Many do not keep artifacts, no tools, no records, nothing that distinguishes those years from others spent working, carrying, surviving. What persists is embodied. a way of lifting that remains careful long after heavy labor has ended, a tendency to conserve energy, an intolerance for waste. The body remembers the period when nothing could be spared. These habits pass quietly into everyday life. They are not explained to children. They are not framed as lessons. They simply appear as ways of doing things, folding, carrying, preparing, without commentary. In this way, the work outlasts its own recognition. It does not survive as narrative, but as posture. The city continues to build, to modernize, to smooth over its earlier forms. The rubble disappears completely. The need that once governed daily life fades into abstraction. But in certain movements, certain hesitations, certain efficiencies, the past remains present, not as memory, as use. Leaving the work. Leaving the work does not feel like an ending. There is no final day, no moment of recognition when the body understands that it will not lift another brick. The work recedes gradually, thinning out as other demands take precedence. One morning, a woman does not return to the line. There is no farewell, no replacement needed. The space closes around her absence, and the work continues. The city does not pause to acknowledge departures. This is how most women leave the rubble, not through decision, but through drift. As employment opportunities reappear, as domestic responsibilities reassert themselves, as the physical cost accumulates, the work becomes one obligation among others rather than the central condition of the day. Some women leave because they can. Others leave because they must. Illness, injury, age. These factors intervene quietly, without ceremony. The body sets limits that cannot be negotiated. Pain that was once background becomes foreground. Endurance reaches a threshold beyond which repetition is no longer possible. The line absorbs these losses. Tasks redistribute. Remaining workers adjust. There is no sense of shortage because the work itself is diminishing. What once required mass effort now requires only maintenance. You notice how quickly presence becomes memory. Faces that were once familiar disappear. The rhythm changes. The day feels different, though it is difficult to say why. The work has not ended, but it has lost its density. The city no longer depends on it in the same way. For those who remain longer, the departure of others sharpens awareness. The lines are shorter now, the tasks more specific. What was once collective labor begins to resemble individual assignment. The sense of shared burden thins as the work becomes less urgent. These women carry a different kind of weight. They are aware, often for the first time, that the work is ending, not because it has been completed, but because it is no longer needed in the same form. The city has crossed a threshold where maintenance replaces clearance. Leaving becomes inevitable. When it happens, it does not feel like release. There is no relief in stepping away from a task that once structured every day. The body does not immediately know how to reorganize itself. Time opens up unevenly. Hours stretch without clear purpose. Strength remains, but its application is unclear. The transition is disorienting. Work had provided rhythm. Its absence creates silence that is not restful, but unfamiliar. The body waits for demands that do not arrive. Some women seek other forms of labor quickly, filling the gap with domestic work, factory jobs, cleaning, caregiving. Others linger in a period of adjustment, uncertain how to measure days without the constant reference of physical effort. The memory of rubble work does not announce itself as loss. It registers instead as absence, of structure, of certainty, of a task that justified exhaustion. Over time, this sensation fades. New routines establish themselves. The body adapts again, slowly releasing some of the tension it once held. Certain movements soften. Others remain fixed. The women re-enter the world that is forming around them, a world that no longer requires their labor in public spaces. The city has moved on. Their departure is complete precisely because it is unnoticed. The body carries on. The work ends, but the body does not return to its previous state. It carries forward what it learned when conditions demanded endurance above all else. Strength remains unevenly distributed. Certain movements feel natural, others strained. The body has been recalibrated to a world of resistance, and that calibration does not disappear simply because the resistance has. You notice this most in moments of ordinary effort. Lifting something small, bending to the ground, holding weight close to the torso. The body chooses methods shaped by years of rubble work, even when those methods are no longer necessary. Efficiency persists where ease might have returned. Pain, too, lingers. Not always immediately. Sometimes it arrives years later, when joints begin to stiffen and flexibility declines. The cause is not always named. There is no line in medical records connecting chronic discomfort to post-war labor. The work has passed beyond documentation. What remains is sensation. Some women adapt easily to this persistence. They incorporate it into daily life without reflection. Others experience it as limitation, a reminder of what was required of them at a time when alternatives were scarce. Neither response is articulated publicly. The body does not ask for interpretation. It simply continues. In this way, the labor outlives its own necessity. It is no longer visible in the city. It is no longer referenced in planning documents or economic narratives. It is stored privately, carried forward without acknowledgement. You see how this kind of endurance resists commemoration. It does not culminate in an event. It does not leave behind a clear artifact. It cannot be easily honored because it does not present itself as exceptional. It was, at the time, simply required. As decades pass, the connection between the work and the body weakens in language, but not in experience. The women age. The city transforms again, layering new structures over old foundations. The post-war years become history rather than memory. New generations move through streets without knowing what once blocked them. The body, however, continues to respond to traces that are no longer visible. A hesitation before lifting, a preference for conserving motion, an instinct to repair rather than replace. These habits are not taught, they are retained. They appear in small, ordinary choices. How food is portioned, how objects are stored, how waste is avoided. The work that once demanded attention now expresses itself as restraint. When asked directly about the rubble years, many women minimize them. It was just work. We did what had to be done. These phrases do not deny hardship. They refuse embellishment. The body does not frame its endurance as sacrifice. It frames it as function. This distinction matters. Sacrifice implies loss for a cause. Function implies response to conditions. The women responded. Their bodies remain marked by that response. In later life, some experience pride when the period is mentioned publicly. Others experience distance. Neither reaction alters the physical record carried within them. The work has already shaped their posture, their limits, their habits. The city no longer needs their labor. The body remembers when it did. What remains unsaid? There are gaps in the record that do not exist by accident. They appear where experience resists translation, where the effort required to explain outweighs the value of being understood. The years of rubble work settle into one of these gaps, present enough to be acknowledged, distant enough to remain largely uninterrogated. What remains unsaid is not hidden. It is simply not pursued. The women do not organize around their experience. They do not form a collective identity that demands recognition. Their work did not produce a shared ideology, only a shared condition that dissolved once the condition changed. Silence follows naturally, not the silence of suppression, but of completion. The task ended. Life continued. There was no need to return to it unless asked. Even when asked, answers remain brief. Details are offered only when required. The texture of the days, the weight, the dust, the repetition, is rarely elaborated. To do so would require re-entering a time when the body was governed by necessity rather than choice. That return holds little appeal. Public narratives move more confidently than private memory. They speak of reconstruction as a national achievement. They identify milestones, turning points, economic recovery. In these accounts, the women appear as a chapter heading rather than as an ongoing presence. They are useful as symbols. Symbols do not speak back. What remains unsaid, then, is not the fact of the work, but its interior logic, the way it occupied the body completely without offering meaning in return. The city benefits from this silence. It allows the past to remain orderly. It keeps recovery legible. It prevents complication. You begin to sense that forgetting, in this context, is not failure. It is a form of stability. Silence does not mean absence. It means that what remains is carried elsewhere, in the way certain questions are avoided, in the way attention drifts when the subject arises, in the ease with which the story is allowed to simplify itself over time. What is left unsaid does not press for inclusion. It waits. For decades, the women live alongside a city that has absorbed their labor without retaining its memory. They pass through spaces they once cleared without marking them as such. The connection exists privately, without ceremony. This is not bitterness. It is proportion. The work was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to be done. In later years, when historians return to the subject, they attempt to reconstruct the experience through records, images, testimonies. They gather fragments and assemble them into something that resembles a story. But something resists. The central truth, that the work was governed by necessity rather than meaning, does not sit comfortably within retrospective narratives. It undermines the desire for coherence. It disrupts the impulse to assign purpose after the fact. And so it is often softened. The women become figures of resilience. Their labor becomes foundational. Their endurance becomes emblematic. What remains unsaid is the simplicity of the condition itself, that the body moved because it had to, that the work continued because stopping was not an option, that meaning was neither required nor sought. As the last of the women age, this silence deepens. There is less opportunity to ask, fewer voices to consult. The city's version of the past settles more firmly into place. What remains unsaid becomes what remains unknown. And yet, the city still rests on it. Every street cleared, every foundation laid, every movement made easier by the absence of debris. The silence holds, not as a void, but as a completed task that does not need to explain itself. Aftermath, when the work is no longer needed. You are walking through the city now without effort. Your path is clear. Your steps fall evenly. The ground offers no resistance that requires planning or caution. What once demanded attention has withdrawn into the background, absorbed into the ordinary functioning of streets and buildings. Nothing announces what was required to make this possible. The city does not mark the labor that preceded its ease. It does not pause to remember the days when movement depended on hands passing bricks, when progress was measured in cleared meters rather than completed plans. The absence feels natural. This is how cities prefer to remember themselves: intact, continuous, uninterrupted by the conditions that once governed them. The past is folded neatly into foundations and left there, out of sight. And yet, the ground beneath you is layered with effort, not the kind that declared itself, not the kind that sought recognition, the kind that responded to weight and necessity and did not ask what it meant. The women who moved through these spaces are no longer present in the way they once were. Their work ended without ceremony. Their departure left no visible trace. The city continued to function, which was the point. What remains is not a monument. It is capacity. The capacity to move, to build, to forget. In private spaces, bodies carried this work forward long after it was required, in habits that favored restraint, in movements shaped by conservation, in a quiet intolerance for waste, for excess, for the unnecessary. These traces did not ask to be understood. They were not lessons. They were adaptations. As years passed, even these traces softened. Strength redistributed itself. Pain settled into places that were rarely named. The work receded into something the body no longer referenced directly, though it never entirely released it. The city aged. New generations arrived without knowledge of what had once filled the streets. They learned the city as it presented itself to them, navigable, stable, complete. The effort required to reach this state was not part of their experience. It did not need to be. For a city to function, most of what sustains it must remain invisible. This invisibility is not cruelty. It is efficiency. The women did not ask to be remembered. They did not frame their labor as sacrifice or achievement. They responded to conditions as they found them. When those conditions changed, they changed with them. That is the quiet truth that resists commemoration. Not that the work was great, or noble, or defining, but that it was sufficient. Sufficient to make space where there was none. Sufficient to allow life to continue without climbing. Sufficient to be left behind once its purpose was fulfilled. Standing here now, you are not meant to feel gratitude in any formal sense. Gratitude implies an exchange, a recognition, a response. This was not an exchange. It was a passage, a period during which the body carried weight so that the future would not have to. The city does not look back. It does not need to. Its ability to move forward rests on what was already done. And so the story settles, not into conclusion, but into quiet continuation, the way the work itself once did. You have been part of Echoes of War, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.